Talking of an embarrassment of riches, Lars, Sweden, with two of the best strikers, certainly in the Premier League, two world-class strikers, may not even make it to the World Cup as we speak. Kosovo done them over, not once, but twice. Questions that they're asking in the Swedish press is, how?
Yeah, from an embarrassment of riches, Dotun, to simply embarrassment, I guess, is what we're doing here. Not a good month for Swedish football. The national senior men's national team losing to Switzerland and then Kosovo at home. And also the under-21s losing 4-0 to Italy and then 6-0 to Poland. Not amazing. Like, things are not good for the Swedes. And they have, since this disaster against Kosovo, they have fired the manager, Jon Dahl Tomasson. Worth noting that he's the first Swedish national team manager ever to get sacked.
Wow.
They've never done that before, ever.
Him and Hansi Flick, 3 peas in a pot.
They've even either waited till the end of the contract or they've stepped down because it's been the right time. But just straight up sacking someone has never happened before. And that should tell you something about how dire the situation is. I refer to Erik Niva, one of the great sort of chroniclers of football in the Swedish language, who writes, I translate, he wrote on Twitter after the game, we're a great, proud football nation. 19 tournaments, 3 World Cup medals. Okay, we missed 1 World Cup, but the time before that, we were in the quarterfinals, top 8 in the world. Does he think this is within the bounds of reason? Does he not understand the magnitude of what is an utterly unprecedented fiasco? Was the question that was being asked. And I have to say, by the more sort of sane and considered voices in the Swedish sporting press after the game against Kosovo, which gives you some idea of what the more sort of short-tempered people were saying. Nothing good. And it was absolutely unsustainable for Jon Dahl Tomasson, the Dane, to continue. And I'm very often Mr. Nuance and Mr. Context on this show. But I'm sorry, this is a straight up case of blame the coach. It just is, because it has been all wrong all the time with Jon Dahl Tomasson. He never settled into the job. I mean, when you come into a job, the Nordic rivalries are very good-natured rivalries, I would say. Like, compared to other parts of the world, it's not comparable to how people feel about some of their neighboring countries. It's very good-natured. But it is still a thing that if you come into the Denmark job as a Swede, or a Norwegian like Oda Hareide, or you come into the Norway job as a Swede as Lars Lagerbäck did, or in this case you come into the Sweden job as a Dane, that requires a little bit of extra diplomatic effort. It just does. There are a lot of people in the country who will not be comfortable having a Dane in charge of the national team. And it will be incumbent upon that coach then to go on something of a charm offensive to show that he is committed to this cause and that he wants to win his people over. International football is so much about emotion, I think. And Dahl Tomasson never did that, not even remotely close. He still lives in the Netherlands. Like just get a flight, just move to Sweden for a couple of years, man, if you're going to do this job. Don't live with the Dutch. And he did his interviews in English, which people found really weird. Now, I can see some logic in that because Danish can be difficult to understand. Even with its Scandinavian languages, we kind of understand each other. People kind of found that a little alienating and weird. And he came across as a little arrogant and not, Swedish, Dotun will know this as well as me, like Swedish culture and Swedish discourse is about consensus building. It's about, it's about charm and consensus building, I would argue. And this is true in football leadership as well. Any Swedish coach you can think of had been like quite smooth, well-talking, chilled out, nice guys who gets everyone together. Whereas Jon Dahl Tomasson, very shaped by Dutch football culture, is quite brusque and not very charismatic. So very much the opposite in terms of his leadership style. So all of these sort of soft skill things were going wrong pretty much all the time. And the fans turned on him pretty quickly when things were not good. And that's before we even get to the point, which is maybe more important, that he kept trying to play a formation that the squad were not suited to. You understand the temptation in trying to find a way to get Isak and Gyökeres, 2 typical number 9s, into the same lineup. So his temptation to play a sort of 3-5-2 formation is understandable from that perspective, but the team never looked comfortable with this. I don't think they have the wing backs for it. I don't think they have the very confident ball playing center halves which you need for it. I'm not convinced you have the sort of the central midfield types for it. So it just never looked good. And a reporter for, I think, the Swedish radio actually overheard in the tunnel after the Kosovo match, Anthony Elanga just shouting to no one in particular, the effing system has to go. So like the players were enormously uncomfortable in the way they were being set up to play. And this has been apparent for several games, and he's not changing anything. It was a total disaster. And the sort of mitigating circumstances for Jon Dahl Tomasson is that they've had a couple of like injury to Kulusevski is terrible for Sweden because he is their most important creator in terms of bringing the ball forward from midfield, finding passes, going past people. He is super important in this group. Also in terms of like spiritual leadership role as well. He's someone who always gives 100%. Spurs fans will know this. And he always like really sacrifices for his country. So him missing is so bad for them. You've had issues in defense with like Victor Lindelöf, who's still an important character for Sweden, who's not been playing for his club side. And we'll get to Alexander Isak, who of course hasn't had a normal start to the season because of his transfer drama. These are not easy things to deal with for a national team coach. We should be maybe understanding of that. But that caveat being put in place, Dahl Tomasson was never a good cultural fit, never made an effort to get there and meet the Swedes halfway, and never figured out a way to set the team up that really suited the players. And when it was clear that what he was trying to do wasn't working, he refused to change it. And they've completely screwed their World Cup qualifying campaign now. They will still likely get a playoff because they won the C group of the Nations League, where arguably Sweden shouldn't be in the first place, but they won it. So they'll probably get some kind of playoff spot through that. But it was also clear that whoever leads them in that playoff cannot be Jon Dahl Tomasson.
Well, who leads them going forward is Alexander Isak, one of the people that leads them. Andy, how much do you think that going on strike to force through his transfer to Liverpool from Newcastle during the summer period, how much do you think that has affected his efficiency? Because he is still the striker that teams were falling over themselves to sign at the end of last season. And not to talk of Victor Gyökeres, but Alexander Isak, first of all. How much of that do you think affected him?
It's a huge thing. There's no doubt about that, because he's not really had a proper pre-season. He's not operational for the games, and we didn't talk about of course they've just lost to Kosovo. They lost to Kosovo before, and he wasn't really fully operational for that. He wasn't fully operational for the September break, having barely played and only just got to Liverpool. So I think it's easy to look at it from a Premier League perspective and say Alexander Isak did what he needed to do to get to Liverpool. So once the Newcastle fans are over it, fine. But actually, it's had a massive influence, and we can talk about Tomasson's role, and I think that's right. But there's a massive case for if Isak had just done, say what Nick Voltemade did, another striker who was desperate to leave his club, but trained hard and kept himself in great nick, and just didn't speak to journalists, didn't make any public pronouncements about his future. Let nature take its course. Well, I'm sure behind the scenes he wasn't letting nature take its course at all, but publicly letting nature take its course, and has thus adapted to the Premier League and the Champions League and his new club pretty quickly. I think this has made a massive dent in Sweden's qualification. Now, I think if you look at Isak's role in these two games that have just happened, even now, we talked about the games in September that he wasn't involved in, but even with the system being not ideal, you look at the chances that Isak had in those games against Sweden and Kosovo. Sharper Isak takes those, and chances at 0-0 as well. The game's different. The game's totally different. It felt to me like we were going a little bit back to old Alexander Isak when he first arrived at Newcastle, when he's an excellent player, but a player who misses a lot of one-on-ones. And he became that, if not best, really close to best player in the Premier League through years and years of hard work at Newcastle. Eddie Howe and his team did a great job on him. Isak did a great job himself. And he got himself to this point where he's this 100 million plus player, and Liverpool want him. This great Liverpool team want him, and he goes there. But it felt that it's a little reminder that, and Messi had it when he first arrived at PSG, there is not a player in the world who can't do without a full pre-season. And, Lars talked about it before as well with Victor Lindelof as well. And Gyökeres, I think we're seeing at the moment, didn't have that perfect pre-season as well, because, again, someone who had to dig his heels in a bit to get that move to Arsenal. There was some upsetting moments for both, and he's had a better pre-season than Isak, but it was a little truncated as well. And I guess this is the other worrying half of it, Lars. I mean, I think that you've got an absolutely valid point in talking about the absence of Kulusevski, who is the reason that you would have 3 at the back and 2 up front to create space for Kulusevski. I don't really know why you need to persevere with that when he's not involved. If you're going back to a more traditional Swedish 4-4-2, can Isak and Gyökeres work together? Because I think the assumption we took from a small sample size, in, as Lars pointed out, Nations League C, which is obviously not the highest standard, we looked at Isak and Gyökeres beating those guys up and thought, oh, okay, right, well, they've got it made. They can play 2 up front, no problem. But I think one of the most concerning things is, even in this system that was meant to work for the 2 of them, Isak gets his chances. Gyökeres didn't feel very involved in either of these games against Switzerland or Kosovo for me. So is that the system, or is that his current form?
I think you're very correct to point out that if some of these potentially game-changing players were in top form, they might have scored some more goals in these last 4 games, and that might have papered over the cracks. That's not necessarily something I'm going to stand here and disagree with. But I do think, but I think Sweden is to an extent in the position that we were in Norway a couple of years ago, when we had some pretty exciting names, but we were struggling to build a collective structure that A, kept goals out and was solid defensively, and B, got the best out of those individual players. So you ask, can you go back to a 4-4-2 and play Gyökeres and Isak up front? Not sure. That's tricky, especially if you want to play with wingers. Like, ideally, you want Elanga on the field. So let's say you play 4-4-2 with Gyökeres and Isak up front. You stick Elanga at right wing. Okay, he's a hard worker. That can work. So you're playing, I guess, Kulusevski as a left winger in this kind of system. That's not ideal for him, but he's a good kid. He'll adapt. And then you're in this position where you're almost more playing a 4-2-4, because those are very attacking players. And I guess the 2 in the middle are going to have to be like Swedish Moise Caicedo, the both of them, to cover enough space for this to make sense. So, but the point I'm making as much as I'm very dismissive of Dahl Tomasson, because he didn't make a good fist of it, I'm not saying this is easy to figure out in terms of how these pieces fit together. And the model, the Swedes will hate this, but the model they might want to look at is what Norway have done and what Ståle Solbakken have done with Norway. To solve this issue, how do we get the best out of both Erling Haaland and Alex Sørloth? And the solution for us was to just ask Alex Sørloth to take one for the team and explain to him, like, yeah, you're 6'4" and you're in your late 20s and you're carrying a lot of muscle, so we're sorry, this is going to suck for you, but you're going to have to play as a winger a lot of the time. You're going to have to go out wide and track your fullback and do a ton of work off the ball. And we're still going to ask you to try to get into the box when we have possession. Which for Alex Sørloth, who's a big guy, who's been scoring a lot of goals in Spain, that is not a fun assignment. That's not really what he wants to be spending his international breaks doing. But he has accepted it and has looked at, because Erling Haaland is such a phenomenon, that, okay, this is our best chance of achieving something as a group. I'm going to have to put my ego aside and just do a job for the team. I think for Sweden going forward, whoever's in charge of the team, whatever formation they play, probably one of Isak and Gyökeres is going to have to do that for whatever system they end up playing to make sense.
I think what we're going to find is, presuming Graham Potter does turn out to be the next Sweden manager, he needs to sit in the press conference, take what Lars has said on board, and do Richard Griffiths in With Nil and Die and go, I shall never play the Dane.
Very good. Ombudsman, it's a Swedish word, talking about consensus. Will there be consensus around Graham Potter taking over if he gets the job?
I think he has a very, very strong candidacy. One thing is there isn't after this Danish misadventure, there will be people who say, okay, we need to get back to basics here. We need a good Swedish guy who understands our culture, who understands our football, who understands our strength, who understands who we are.
Or an English coach, a good English coach that understands all of that because he's been there and done it.
That's the whole thing, because right now there isn't really that standout Swedish character, not that I can see right now, based on, you know, various merits. So then instead you have Graham Potter, who really does know Swedish football and culture. Not only has he worked in Sweden as a coach, but he worked at a low level. Like, he started with Östersund when they were in the lower divisions and brought them up. So it's not like he's lived in a fancy flat in Stockholm and got paid a few million to coach AIK or something. Like, he's someone who really has seen Swedish culture day to day up close and will understand those things better than a foreign coach who had just been in the country for a period. So, like he said this week, Potter, is that he cares a lot about the country. He still has a house in Sweden. You know, 2 of his kids were born there. So I think with Potter, you could get a guy who, culturally will be a better fit. And I think this kind of more relaxed consensus builder, I think, is the kind of guy he seems to be, the kind of leadership he favors, which may not have served him well at Chelsea or West Ham, potentially. But I think in the Swedish context, that would make more sense. And he also brings a little bit of experience. Like, we have this tendency in football to think failure is kind of like some kind of contagious disease that we need to keep away from us. Like, ban the barricades and throw them in the pits. But I mean, the reality is, for most people in most jobs, you learn much more when things don't go right than when they do, right? So I think Potter will come out of these experiences at Chelsea and West Ham having learned a lot and developed as a leader. So I think him coming back with that experience, again drawing the comparison to Norway, Ståle Solbakken did a great job at FC Copenhagen, did not have a good time at Köln or at Wolves when he tried himself in Germany and England, and has proven himself, in my view, to be a very capable Norway coach. So the fact that he's had a few setbacks in England at the highest level, I think, is not a disqualifier for Potter at all. And I think he would be a very interesting choice for them.